Final Fantasy II, the real Final Fantasy II, not the release of Final Fantasy IV that got labeled Final Fantasy II in the West, is the second of the 3 Final Fantasy games to release on the NES/Famicom, and my recent playthrough on the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster on Switch was my first experience with the game, so that's going to be my focus here. Final Fantasy II is a huge departure from the original Final Fantasy in just about every significant way. Some of those departures are huge improvements in my opinion, but I'm much less fond of others. The most immediately apparent difference between Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy II is the greater emphasis on narrative in the second game. Instead of a generic, purify 4 crystals and beat the big baddie quest that 4 nameless adventurers embark on, you have set names for your initial party of 4, Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon. And their quest, while far from original, doesn't feel nearly as generic as in the first game. There are also 5 playable characters who join your party on a temporary basis throughout the game. Gordon, Joseph, Leela, Minwu, and Rickard. All 9 of these characters have distinct personalities, as do many of the NPCs you'll meet throughout the game. The power-hungry Emperor of Palamecia has launched a war of global conquest, and the last holdouts of resistance have banded together in the small town of Altair. The rebel army, under the leadership of Princess Hilda of the fallen Kingdom of Fynn, is trying desperately to hold out against the Empire's army and find a way to reclaim their stolen homelands. This involves the player parties going on missions with actual objectives beyond, these 4 crystals got monster infested, go fix it. Again, the story isn't going to blow your mind or anything, but it is a huge improvement over the skeletal at best story that the first game had. The characters, while actually named and given personalities in this game, are admittedly the weak link in the narrative, and not all of them are, in my opinion, particularly well written. For example, I found myself completely uninterested in Firion, Maria, and Leon as characters. But some of them, like Gordon and Joseph, are charming characters that I quite enjoyed. As was the case with the first game, the Pixel Remaster totally overhauls the visuals in Final Fantasy II, and brings them from the blocky 8-bit sprites that admittedly rarely look good without the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, to a modern HD pixel sprite form that is more reminiscent of the 16-bit Super Nintendo than the 8-bit NES to me. The sprites, and especially environments, are significantly more detailed and clearer in this remaster, and more modern effects have been added in, like fog in some dungeons, for example. As is the case for all 6 games in the Pixel Remaster, the soundtrack has also been given a complete overhaul and features a gorgeous new orchestral arrangement, although you do have the option of keeping the original NES chiptune soundtrack if you so choose. One of the big changes that I don't care for, however, is the leveling system. Final Fantasy II doesn't use typical XP like the previous game did. Instead, it uses a more skill-based system in which, rather than a character's having a level that goes up over time, the character gains levels in specific skills with use. If you spend the whole game using a sword and shield, that character's sword and shield level might both be 12, but their axe, lance, knife, and bow skills would all be 1, meaning they would be significantly weaker and less accurate if they switched to those weapons. At level 1, a spell is weak and inaccurate. At the maximum level of 16, you're basically flinging thermonuclear warheads around. This does eliminate the traditional job or class system and gives you a little bit more freedom to craft characters as you want, but I find that the constraints of class and job do make things a little more streamlined as far as what character plays what role and what kind of equipment to assign. I definitely don't hate the system, and it was a nice breath of fresh air, but I do think I would have preferred a more traditional system. It's also a little obnoxious because levels start to take forever to gain after level 8, and the difficulty of the enemy you're fighting directly determines how much experience in that skill you get. If you try to grind on weak enemies, you'll still get money from the battles, but you may not be getting any skill experience. To some extent, that's logical, but most RPGs will give you at least some experience for grinding early game enemies, even if it's reduced. One of the goals of the Pixel Remaster, and something I wholeheartedly approve of, is offering a more modern, streamlined experience. JRPGs are unfortunately known for bloat. And Final Fantasy is not blameless in establishing that stereotype, especially as older games have gotten ported to newer consoles and expanded. To that end, the extra content from the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation Portable ports of this game are missing. That's kind of a bummer for those wanting a full and complete experience, but consider this perspective. This is a modern version of the developer's original vision for the game, free of any later influences that may or may not have gelled well with that original vision. You're not getting the most complete version, but you are arguably getting the purest version of the game, aside from the actual original release. In order to streamline the game for modern gamers, especially adults with little energy and even less free time to play video games, a number of quality-of-life features have been introduced. There is an auto battle that has characters automatically use their last move again, be it attack, defend, a spell, etc. There's also an option to have your characters always run rather than walk in a dungeon, and you can toggle encounters on and off. All of that was present in the Final Fantasy I Remaster. Like Final Fantasy I, there are also boosts here. You can adjust the experience and gold given by enemies from as high as 4 times the original rate, all the way down to half the original rate. And you can have it set to give a guaranteed slight increase to a character's max HP after a certain number of battles, given that this is not a traditional leveling system. These are all obviously optional, so if you think that it makes a game too easy to use these improvements and boosts, then you're good to go, as they all default to off. Most people I know who have played Final Fantasy II on either NES, via fan translations, or its PS1 release as part of the Final Fantasy Origins collection aren't terribly fond of the game. Great story, bad gameplay and level progression tends to be the gist of it. The Pixel Remaster does as much as possible to remedy that without actually changing the core design of the game. I didn't use the boost to money gained, but I did turn on compensatory HP and increased the experience to 2x to speed things up a little bit, and I found it to be a thoroughly enjoyable experience. That double boost to XP took out a lot of the monotony of the grinding with this progression system. It definitely didn't charm me as much as the original game did with how cumbersome its skill-based leveling can be, but it was a fun game nonetheless, and the NES limitations and brutal progression being remedied here definitely made it more playable. If you want the most content-rich Final Fantasy II experience, go with the GBA or PSP versions. But if you want the most accessible way to play it and have your time as a busy adult respected, the Pixel Remaster is the perfect way to play the game, especially on the portable Switch. Final Fantasy II is definitely one of the main series' low points, but I still think it's worth playing for Final Fantasy fans or big JRPG fans. Too Long Didn't Watch summary is, it's a pretty decent, but not great JRPG adventure. My rating for Final Fantasy II Pixel Remaster on Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox Series, and PC is a C.